Welcome to the VT Show, a weekly online series featuring vineyard artists sharing conversation, insight, and performance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the VT Show. I'm Sarah Stern, and I'm one of the Vineyard's artistic directors.
Hello, my name is Reggie D, and I'm an artist in residence this season with the Commissary, which created Lessons in Survival.
We are really happy to be here tonight to talk about the Vineyard's upcoming original cast reading of Cornelius Eady's astonishing play, Brutal Imagination. It will be available for streaming on demand starting this Thursday, May 20th through June 3rd.
You know, actually, Sarah, I don't know that reading is the most accurate word to use in this case. It's like a cross between like a reading and like a fully realized film. Yes, that is totally true. That is absolutely true. Wait till you see it. Brutal Imagination premiered at the Vineyard 20 years ago, starring Joe Morton and Sally Murphy. This new reimagined digital version was conceived and directed by Joe Morton, and who also reprises his role as Mr. Zero. And it reunites him with Sally Murphy as Susan Smith, the woman who in 1994 in South Carolina murdered her two young sons and then made up a story that a Black man had kidnapped them. And Brutal Imagination brings this invented Black man to life. And we'll talk about him tonight, among many other things. We're also honored to have with us the brilliant playwright and poet of Brutal Imagination, Cornelius Eady, along with the fantastic multi-hyphenate Joe Morton and Sally Murphy. And a little bit later in the hour, we'll be joined by the video designer and a fellow artist in residence, Jared Mazzacci, to talk about the unusual process behind making this version of Brutal Imagination. There'll also be time for some Q&As. So if you out there in the audience have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. But before we bring on Cornelius and Joe and Sally, we would like to share a sneak peek clip from Brutal Imagination. Clarissa, can you bring it up for us, please?
Whoever has my children, please bring them to us.
And this is my life now. A faint hum behind the sensation. The blur of doubt at the corner of the flashbulb. These are my names these days.
Hungry, senseless, man of little schooling, ninny, fraidy cat.
If I had an opinion, I guess I would tell y'all I'm tired. Days and days of near misses almost snapping into focus. The in-between feeling of circling the streets a rumor. If I could, our weariness would bite into the sheriff's ear. Oh, Susan steps to the mic. How do we feel?
I just want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much. And you guys got to be strong, because I just know.
There's a crack in our voice.
Wow. Let's please welcome Cornelius Eady, Joe Morton, and Sally Murphy.
So good.
Wow, you guys. Wow. It's so great to see you. How are you all doing?
Very well. Very well. Good.
It has really been an incredible process putting this piece together. And we are going to absolutely get in today to why we wanted to revisit this play now, 20 years later. But first, Cornelius, as Reggie mentioned in the introduction, you are not only a playwright, but a poet, and Brutal Imagination started as a cycle of poetry, which then became a play. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to write Brutal Imagination?
Briefly, it was just the examination of the reflex of why it was so easy for Susan to call that golem up. And, that reflex is, of course, ingrained in this culture. Right, but I wanted to examine why it was so easy for her. Susan Smith didn't have any white friends. And I think one of the telling points of the lie is that it's the way that she's dresses the guy. You know, my mother-in-law took a look at one of the rushes and said, you know, he doesn't dress like a black person. you know, and I told her, well, you know, that's because it's coming out of her head. It's what she knows. It's the material that she knows. But it's also part of what she thinks black culture is and what makes up black culture. So she's trying to construct this guy. And I wanted to see why it was so easy, so effortless for her to use this person as an excuse. And the poems and then the play is just the way that I explore it.
Yeah, she didn't have any black friends, right? And this is all
as
in
far
her
as I know. Yes,
imagination.
she didn't.
Yeah.
When I researched the story, I didn't know she didn't have any black friends.
Yeah. So can we all talk about the inspiration behind revisiting this play now, 20 years later? And Joe, maybe we can start with you on that, because so much of this is your vision and conception for how this reading could go as well.
So as we may remember, Amy Cooper is in the park with her dog, and she is being scolded by a black man for not obeying the law because the dog is off the leash. And so he asks her to put the dog back on the leash, and she refuses. And then she tells him that he needs to stop recording her. And the more he records her, the more she says, I will call the police and tell them that a black man is assaulting me. And she actually does it. She actually gets on the phone and she calls the police. And I think when that incident happened, I mean, for me and for Cornelius and I, you know, it sort of brought the play right back to us. Sort of there it is, where something is being weaponized in order to take the onus off of what she was doing and put it on someone else.
Right. I
think black criminalization is a part of the mythology of this country that has been with us for a very, very long time. And as Cornelius points out in his poetry and in the play, it's an easy thing for many, many people to go to decide that a black man has done this, a black man has done that. I mean, how many stories have we read about a black man who was accused of raping or whistling at a white woman? You know, Emmett Till comes to mind, of course. And all kinds of things go crazy, and people believe it. I mean, it's not just how easy was it for her to come up with that story, but how easy it was for the country to believe it without questioning it. Everyone said, oh, that must be the truth in there, and they went for it. So all of those things led up to our deciding wanting to do this play again. And of course, it was great to be able to do it again with, of course, Sally, who had done it so well to begin with.
For people who don't know the play yet, can you talk a little bit more about what it actually is about, and maybe differences between the take when we did it originally 20 years ago and the conception of it now and what you were exploring in this iteration of it?
I think 20 years ago, we did the play very much as two characters who are in conflict with one another and the truth. That you have these two people who are going through this adventure, going through this event, and trying to get to the truth. My perception of this was that, as I believe is true in this country for many, many things, this black man is her conscience, that he is the one that's driving her to the truth. He is the one who keeps saying as she goes through all of this, that's not going to work, and here's why. You know, she just can't. She will not allow herself to believe that this can't work. I mean, even when she starts, she says, you know, how the woman escaped is unclear. But when she gets to the idea of who did it, the abductor is described as a black man. She realizes she has the golden ticket. Oh my God, there it is. That's what will work, and it does. And so, if Mr. Zero is her conscience and not just some figment of her imagination, then their conflict has higher stakes to it. Then it is coming from inside of her. It is in my mind, part of the American guilt, if you will, about how black people are treated in this country. If you look at George Floyd, you know, the policeman who knelt on his neck even when it was over. So the guy was just so big. And he did that until the guy still wasn't breathing.
So that there is this idea that the black body can be used to be blamed for all of the things that this other person just will not take on themselves. That's how I look at it.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Sure. I mean, we're taping this on the day that the DA turns in a judgment on this black man named Andrew Brown Jr. Who unfortunately got shot. They were serving a warrant on him. He panics and gets in his car. He drives off. They decide, the DA says that he was trying to kill them. He wasn't. He was unarmed. He was trying to get away. And they shot him. I think it was like almost 40 times. And the DA today, this afternoon, just announced that it was completely justified. I mean, and that's where we are. That's the country at this moment, where the black body is, in jeopardy. So yes, the play is examining that. It's really, in a way, the space between Susan saying that a man kidnapped her, carjacked her car, and then changing it to a black man. I mean, that's really, in a way, that's also what the play is also trying to examine. That little jump between man and black man, what that actually meant, and how she knew how to use it, and what she was trying to use it for. So yeah. I mean, we're in this really. I was going to say interesting, but it's not an interesting. It's kind of a scary moment, right? We're basically we're in a country where basically we are telling ourselves that the facts don't matter. Right? We just had 4 years of a president and a election where people are still pretending that what happened didn't happen, right? And even trying to pretend that the armed resurrection on the Capitol building was simply tourists. So this unrealness is really where this play operates, I think.
Yeah, there's so much brutal imagination.
Oh, yes.
It reminds me of that line the white about black people in the imagination of whiteness are like the default repository for all of the pain and all of the suffering and all of the struggle. So that white people get to live innocent and get to innocence. Yeah, Sally, I'd love just for you to talk a little bit about. Were you getting that echo too, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm getting it, and I'm wondering if someone has a second device on or something that.
It stopped.
Great.
Well, it stopped for a moment.
I was going to say, in terms of what Cornelius was saying, shoot, should I keep talking?
Yes.
About exploring why it was so important for Susan to invent the carjacker, and why it was so easy for America to believe it immediately, despite the fact that there were no facts, and there was the composite didn't look like anybody. I think it was just as easy for everyone to forget that she invented a black man who murdered her children, because I was one of those people. When I got the call about this play in 2001, of course I remembered Susan Smith. I forgot that she invented Mr. Zero. And 20 years later, I would say, we've now done this on Audible. Now, we've done it for the Vineyard. I would say 100% of the white people I've told about this play don't remember. So what can I say? Both are easy. It's easy to invent Mr. Zero. It's easy to forget Mr. Zero.
Yeah. And also, we're seeing it, as Cornelius was just referring to, the events of January 6th, that like part of that sort of washing of that trauma is also part of like how we experience the you know, white supremacy, that it's like, oh, this was terrible for you, but nope, that was just Thursday. Oh no, it was very different. I forgot about that. No, let's move on. Let's something else. But you know, Cornelius and Joe were talking about how Mr. Zero functions in this particular piece, not just as a person in conflict with her, but also like part of her conscience and her subconscious. Yeah, like what was that relationship like for you to explore 20 years ago and now?
I'm not so sure that 20 years ago we were exploring that aspect of it. I think we were exploring sort of the bizarreness of the fact that she made up this man, and that they were sort of traveling this horrible road together. I think to deal with it as her conscience, I think was something new to sort of deal with. The idea that, and for me, it came out of the idea that I think for many things that happen in this country, Black people are the conscience. People of color are the conscience. Women are the conscience of this country. It happens over and over and over again, and so that seemed to me a far more interesting thing to mine in this play than simply the idea that she made him up. As Sally said, I think most people forgot that she made him up, and they just remember the fact that she killed her 2 children. So if we mine this other part of what's going on in her, then again, it begins to sort of open up to a greater view, which I believe is America.
Yeah. So what was that like for you? Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I was saying, yeah, Sally, what was that? What was that process?
Oh,
like?
I was just going to say, they remember she lied. They don't remember what the lie was. You know, people are like, oh, she lied. Yeah, she deceived. She lied for so long, and we believed her. We felt bad for her, but they don't remember what she said.
I mean, you know, I guess we're here. We might as well park for a second and chat. Yeah, Cornelius and Joe, like, you know, obviously this play lives very much, I mean, this story, this real life story that is literally ripped from the headlines, exists in the lineage of Emmett Till. It exists sort of in the fictional lineage of Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah, just, you want to speak both as the playwright and director, also now, Joe, of the lineage of the Black male body as it exists in the white imagination, as an inspiration and a jumping off point and sort of a unsolvable problem in the piece.
Cornelius, I was going to leave that to you to begin.
I was going to say, go ahead, but really, you know, I'm always reminded of these moments when of something that Mark Twain said about history, you know, that doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes, and unfortunately, this is what we're talking about here, you know, from Emmett Till all the way over to now Andrew Brown Jr. You know, we have this. You know, this line, you know, this daisy chain of you know, these horrible, you know, destruction of the human, of the Black body. It's the mythology of it, right? You know, of what it's supposed to represent, and you know, even though we're a really very small part of the population, you know, we're actually we loom large in the imagination and the consciousness of the country, and the way we loom large in that consciousness is kind of scary, you know, something that needs to be contained, something that needs to be controlled, and if not contained and controlled, destroyed. You know, and there's various ways that we do this, right? We do it through, you know, we do it socially. We do it in terms of education. We do it in terms of housing. We do it in terms of, you know, so all these ways that we try to figure out this, you know, like you say, is unsolvable. I say undigestible, you know, question in this culture about who we are and how we're supposed to operate. And you know, so Zero, even though he's fictional, is part of that lineage in my mind. You know, he's the guy who's supposed to shoulder the responsibility of being the boogeyman, right? When he was hoping, if you couple the words Black men and, you know, kidnapped children together, it's the worst thing you can think of in her mind, right? And she wants to put that thought into everybody else's head in Union, South Carolina, right? This is the worst thing you can actually think of. A black man with 2 young white kids, right? Loose, wild, dangerous, uncontrollable. God knows what he'll do, right? You know, but that's the mythology she's tapping into, right? That you know, this person, this body is so dangerous, so untamable that it's your worst nightmare, right? And we go through so much time and energy and to try to not to solve it, but to try to keep it under control. You know, so for me, Zero in her head, you know, is tapped in to do this. Unfortunately, Zero isn't there to play the game for her. Right? He's not there to be the obedient servant. He's not there to be the person who's going to go along with this. He's the person who's there to mess her up. Right? You know, he pushes back. So I was trying to. So hopefully that tension was what I was trying to set up in the first time we did this. And again, with Joe's direction of this, it stops being you know, adversarial in the sense that there's a white woman being bothered by a golem. Right. It actually becomes closer to the idea of how the book of poetry operates. When you read the book of poetry, there's no way of it's just her head, right? It's all happening in her head. There's no other place around for this to happen. She's imaginary and he's in her head. But the way Joe has set this up, we now have double consciousness in her head, which I think is a lovely idea and a lovely punishment, even. So there and there, that's where the struggle goes on. You know, it is one person with two thought, you know, with 2 lines of thought operating at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me what happened was, so if you look at Susan, what she does, right? So she goes to the lake, she kills her children. So my thought was, then what happened next?
Right.
She's standing on the edge of that lake. What happened next? So she ran thinking, what story am I going to tell? What am I going to tell that people are going to believe that I can get away with? And I don't think she really knows. And it's interesting that, as Cornelius said before, that she says, a man jumped into my car. So that already sets up power, right? It already sets up the idea that something more powerful than she jumped in the car and took her kids. And then she says, a black man. And then Cornelius just said something that was really interesting. He talks about the mythology of what all of that means, right? So in this play, Mr. Zero says, your fear is my blood and your need part mythical. And I think that's what leads us to that center of the play, where we see the supposed subservient servant, you know, the Uncle Tom who's going to do everything there for you, although he says everything about me is a lie, that I was actually set up to do something else. We see Buckwheat, who everyone thinks is adorable. He's a childlike man that people can't see beyond the child. Then we go to, you know, Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima is the, you know, the cook, the servant, the Beulahs of the world, all those kinds of things. We have Stephen Fetchit, who is so inane and says, I have no body. They actually took my body away from me. And then we end up with Stagger Lee, who says, this is who she thinks she's got, and she's nowhere near what this is. Nowhere near what this is. She thinks she made this up, but nowhere near it. And what's interesting is, if all of that is floating around in Susan Smith's head, whether she's aware of it or not, these are all images that she's been, that come across her consciousness. So she's not picking this out of nowhere. She's picking this out of things that she's seen in her life. You know, at one point, Zero says to her, you know, if you were in my neighborhood, people would just say, you know, you weren't lost, you were abandoned. You were abandoned, you know. And then at the end of that whole thing, he says, but look what you did. When you remembered me to the police artist, you remembered the kid. And that's who that drawing is. It's not a man, it's some boy. So it's all of these things that I think starts to fill her up, that she tries to put together to create this person who supposedly kidnapped her children. And I think it's what happened with, you know, all the things that Cornelius mentioned before, the Emmett Tills of the world. And, you know, it's this storytelling, this Black criminalization of who society would like, how society would like to deal with this. What's the easiest way? It's either to incarcerate us or to destroy us, one of the two.
Sally, can you talk about being inside Susan's head, especially with Mr. Zero in there too, and what it is for you to inhabit that and the relationship?
Being Susan. Well, I think it's far less lonely having Mr. Zero in my head than it would be to not have be playing Susan and not have Mr. Zero, because it's so bleak. So it is a relationship, you know, there's a need and that was really useful, if that makes sense. There's something to work out. There's possibility. There's, you know, in a sick way, there's a hope that my story will actually work, and that he will help me. So it is, in a funny way, it makes it easier, because a shared thing is always easier. There's an energy to it, and it was really interesting doing it for film versus on stage. I watched the final cut this afternoon, which I loved. I think these guys did such an amazing job, and it's almost like, you know, our piece was so theatrical, and it was so liberating in its own way that, you know, we could do anything. But this was interesting because it's almost like we didn't have the burden of theater. We just had a camera. We were doing it in our homes. We couldn't be physical with each other. The play was so physical. Everything didn't have to work as a whole, you know, like the way, you know, a theater piece does. It was, and I feel like we succeeded in that, and we were able to go into each other's heads, and I mean, especially Joe's section with all the characters, which on stage was about sort of the education of Susan, right? And here I feel like it's the education of the world. It's so intimate. So I guess it is very different, and it was really valuable to do it this way, I think, and broke it open in new ways.
I will say the original production that premiered at the Vineyard 20 years ago was directed by Diane Paulus and had a jazz score by Deirdre Murray. And Joe and Sally were absolutely extraordinary in it. And when it came time to revisit it now, I think we were all looking at, you know, what moment are we in, and what can we learn from this play in this moment. And it did lead to a lot of new ideas and new ways to explore it, which has been incredibly exciting to do that.
Well,
now,
Jared.
And Jared, who we're going to bring on in a minute
Jared,
to talk about the actual making of this.
Right.
And this is probably the right segue, except that I think I also maybe want to ask, and I think it's started to be answered in this conversation that we're having, but it felt like 20 years ago when we premiered this, maybe there were aspects of this conversation that people weren't ready to have. And I wonder if you all feel like that conversation is in a different place now. Does it feel like people are maybe more ready to have it right now, especially given the experiences of the past year?
I mean, I think, you know, the interesting thing about the whole George Floyd thing was that we were all stuck at home, and you couldn't escape those images. You couldn't escape that man kneeling on his neck for 9 and some odd seconds, 9 minutes and some odd seconds. You couldn't escape it. Whereas before, just as Sally was saying, people could easily forget. Oh yeah, she lied and she killed her kids, but they could forget it. The man who was stopped because his taillights were out and he ran away and got shot in the back, you know, and somebody else filmed it. We can forget those moments because we could go off and have our day, go off and go to work and deal with our children in the house and so forth. But that moment with George Floyd and that whole trial, I think we were stuck at home and had to watch it. And how long will it change the conversation? I don't know. I know it's changed it a bit, that now it's inescapable, although Andrew Brown has just happened and it doesn't seem like maybe anything's going to change at all. So the world is in flux, but something has happened. There's been a feather that has been plucked, that now people, it's not quite as easy as it used to be. So maybe that's where we're at. I don't know.
Yes, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell, Joe. I mean, I'm trying to be optimistic about it and say that's exactly what's going on. That people are finally understanding just how you really can't, you just can't bat this away anymore. You can't pretend it's not happening. You can't pretend it's not happening around you. I mean, I like to point out, of course, that George Floyd and Amy Cooper happened on the same day. That happened on the same day. So you got this, this, like you say, you're at home and you're seeing this stuff and you're seeing this stuff accumulate, right? Right? It's the accumulation of it that I think that people are really starting to really sort of say, you know what, wow. I think George Floyd might turn out to be the Bull Connor moment, right? People know the 60s, that moment when basically the police dogs are out and the fire hoses hit the protesters, and the country just sort of just shudders in repulsion, because that's the line. That's the line that they really think that is too much. And I think George Floyd for a lot of people was the line that becomes too much, right? And it doesn't mean that people stop. Things keep happening. But it's a certain kind of consciousness gets evoked, where people are sort of like saying you can't go back from that. You can't unforget that. You can't unsee it, as they say, right? So I'm hoping that, like you, Joe, that it carries forward. It's something that people are understanding, and maybe people are starting to try to imagine the world without this, or how do you remove this? How best to remove this, or how best to confront the people who are holding on to this idea, which is a bankrupt idea. It's always been a bankrupt idea, right? So maybe this is our brains are really starting to sort of like move in that direction. How do you imagine a world where you have the absence of this? What does that mean? Is that justice? Is it equality? Is it how do you factor that in, right? I think we're starting to try to imagine what that world is going to be and you can't move it until you imagine it. So I'm hoping, art does that. I'm hoping the play in some ways contributes to that kind of thought process.
Yeah, I think the thing for me that was so troubling to watch, and as a person who has lived my entire life as a Black man, yeah. How easy the reflex was is just, you never get over how easy it is for someone to just be like, oh, what is the most brutal version? What is the strongest? Oh, it was a Black man. And how he's instantly, 7 foot tall and their muscles bulging out of his eyeballs. And that's just like how Blackness exists in the consciousness of this society. And pieces like this, which I got to see the screening of it and also read the script. And I think what's so beautiful about the poetry is that, I think sometimes we need the beautiful images to take us away from the horror of what is happening right in front of us. Yeah. And it does that so beautifully. And in addition to the images that you create with your words, there were also some fantastic images that were created by Jared, and I feel like now is a great time to bring Jared into our conversation. Yes, please. Hello, welcome. Welcome.
Hey. Welcome, Jared. again, this was such an exciting process to be able to make this. And what people may not realize when they even see that clip is that really this was entirely shot in Joe and Sally's apartments with a green screen and edited to tell the story and to realize this artistic vision. So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that, the ways in which the technology was used to help realize the vision and tell the story.
Yeah, you know, I think, well, Joe, Cornelius, and I met and kind of talked tech talk and design talk very early on. And at that point, I was doing a lot of live design of a bunch of shows that I've been working on. And so we were able to, in real time, kind of talk about the overall feel of it, not necessarily the look of it, which I actually think is what propelled us forward as we continue to just like chisel at the thing, because we all were discussing feelings as opposed to like specific look, and we were talking looks, of course, but
Absolutely.
there's a lot more of a deepening of understanding of why we're doing these scenes in the ways that we are, which help because we're filming over Zoom. We don't know our unknowns, and so when we hit up against unknowns, we're setting ourselves up for success, because then we can pivot better, as opposed to the only idea we talked about didn't work, you know. And so we were able to weave that a lot more. And as we started filming, I think one of the key things that we made a last minute decision on that I'm in edit was so happy with was that we ran the show from start to finish, or scenes from start to finish, in forward, side, would do scenes where Sally would have her back to us, Joe would be turning to the camera, but we never did it like a film shoot where we start and stopped every shot and then we put it together. It was very theatrical, and that was very helpful editing wise, because the energy was generated by Sally and Joe, not by the editor. And I think that that's really important as we're venturing into these virtual storytelling experiments, is how do we maintain power and control of story with our storytellers, not with the editor. That's more film, you know? And so that is where it got really exciting. And for me as a designer, I started thinking about, they're in a car. I need to find this side of the Mazda Protege, the front of the Mazda Protege, the back of the Mazda Protege, the other side, the rear view mirror, and then almost as if, you know, I'm tinkering in video game world right now, almost thinking in 3 dimensions to be able to do these hard cuts, so that it really did feel like we're inside a car. And it was a huge challenge, and I applaud Joe, Sally, and Cornelius for trusting me with the skills that I brought to the table. It's a huge unknown. It's just a lot of, like, you know, close your eyes and just keep leaping forward. And that's brought out the best in collaboration these days. So I've really appreciated that with everyone, you know, so.
It was truly an interesting collaboration. I mean, it was going from Cornelius's script, and then, because I remember we had a reading even before we started talking tech, we had a reading of the play so you could see the play, and then getting into, as you said, the feelings of it all. And what was remarkable for me, at any rate, is sort of taking Cornelius's script, sort of adapting that into a screenplay of sorts, passing that on to Jared, having conversations with Jared about what it should feel like, where we should be, you know, how things should sort of transition from one thing to the other. And in some ways felt like the guy could read my mind, because he would come up with something and think, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, so it was that kind of really fairly easy collaboration. I mean, we ran into technical problems all the time with sound and with the look of things, but we managed to sort of barrel our way through all of that stuff and maintain the structure and, as he said, the emotions of the piece, which was important.
Well, and I think that was the energy handoff between Joe and Sally, to me, was more important than anything else. If we could feel the like tentacles connecting between Sally and Joe, we had our paint and we could solve it in various ways. But if we didn't have that, then I think our note sessions would have been, how do we create relationship between these two? And would back ourselves into a corner that way. So, as we were hitting up against each of those moments of technical challenges inside the film room, for me, it was most important to make sure that their connection was always maintained, no matter what we were doing. And I knew and trusted with their powerhouse storytelling techniques, we would find a solution, even if it wasn't the solution we thought, because that's the most important thing. So
we have a couple of images that we want to share, just some like BTS stuff. I mean, these are incredible to look at when you see this and then the final production.
Right. So this is what you actually shot. These are these other images that you found, and then when
so this was
all
me
together,
like deep diving onto the interwebs of finding like what is a Mazda Protege headrest, and then finding just that, and then being able to place that behind her in the green screen in order to make it feel immersive. And yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's just incredible. Every shot of it is incredible.
When you think about it, not only were Sally and I not in the same space, but neither was Jared and neither was Scott, who was doing sound. I mean, none of us were in the same space. We were all in completely different places. The only space we existed simultaneously was on the screen.
And to add one other thing too, because when I first started compositing it together, I was focusing on extreme realism at first, like just making sure that everything felt real. And as I started to kind of push it a little and do fake camera pushes in and kind of skew the angles, as I was listening to the first half of this interview, it occurred to me the whole thing sort of exists in this liminal space of Sally's mind being led by Joe's narration, and we're actually never in reality.
Right.
And so as a result, that liberated this like need for realism inside the edit, and really allowed us to lean on theatricality more so than cinema. And cinema can go in that direction, but I kept finding myself being like, what would we do in theater here? You know, how would we solve this theatrically? And then that led me to the correct kind of composite as people call it. So
I feel like that's such a great segue. Sarah and I were just back channel chatting. And I feel like, you know, I'm so curious for you, Joe and Sally, because you did this 20 years ago on stage. What were the differences between, you know, like the original production and this? Did it feel more intimate in some way? Did it feel more confessional? Like, yeah.
I just want to go on record and say I didn't think our show was a burden when I said we didn't have the burden of theater. I don't think theater is a burden, and I loved doing our play. So I hope the context of what I said made sense.
Totally.
Absolutely, Sally. So here. Yeah, it wasn't chopped liver. The play was actually quite wonderful. Yeah.
It was pretty extraordinary.
I think what Jared is pointing at is probably the major difference, because we were trying so desperately to stay inside Susan's head. It didn't have to be real. It didn't have to function in a hardcore reality. We could move things around. We can move her around. We can move where we were, because it was all in her brutal imagination. Whereas on stage, it was, at least 20 years ago, it was more about this sort of adversarial relationship between these two people, and it became more physical. This was less physical and more inside her head, more inside her emotions, more inside more inside of Susan's emotions.
I agree, Joe. 20 years ago, my idea was cat and mouse, basically, right? And the challenge was to get him out of her head, right, and physicalize him, right? How best can we do that, right? Yeah, this is totally different, right? I mean, this is the reverse of that. Excuse me, and I think that's actually what the excitement of this production actually is. Instead, it's unreal, but it's always been unreal, right? The whole thing is unreal. The whole premise is unreal, right? So it actually makes sense to be in that location, in a way that I never really would have thought of until we started doing this. It makes total sense for that to be located and operating in that location. It's just like that's the home. That's the home.
And one other thing to add to that too has been really fascinating of what's just the amount of ingredients that we need to put together to still allow our viewer to imagine the rest. Like there was an interesting threshold of if we gave too much of all we need is a microphone and blur out zero. Now I don't need the exterior of the building that she's speaking in front. I don't need that stuff. It can remain in darkness. But when I think about that scene, I place her exactly where I need to place her. And you may place her slightly differently, but that's your intimate relationship to it. And I think that became really important here too. To make sure that we're always inspiring the imagination of the viewer, not just delivering it to them.
Right. And the idea in that moment was that at that moment in this horrible event, Susan is becoming far more the character that people are looking at and less so for Zero, which is why he's blurred and in the background. I mean, we just listened to what Cornelius wrote. He says, this is where I'm living now, back here. I'm now the rumor. I'm now all this other stuff. So it just made more sense to do that. And again, in a theatrical sort of environment, that would be very difficult to do.
Right. There are aspects of this storytelling that were only achievable actually through creating it in this medium, which I think is one of the very exciting things about this. And going back to the voice of Mr. Zero, Cornelius, when you began to hear his voice, back when you were writing this cycle of poetry, did his voice unfold to you very quickly? How did you discover it over a period of time? Did his history come full-fledged to you?
Well, my memory of writing the poems, it came pretty quickly. It was actually the first 3 or 4 poems in the cycle were written on one afternoon. I mean, I was trying to figure out, well, this is the guy. I was trying to figure out the dimensions of the guy, right? So I figured out because the story kept nagging at me. I wanted to finally get around to writing it, and I was sitting there and I was thinking, okay, really, literally, how I got born. How did he get born, right? And the title of the poem is basically just the first experiment. I was thinking of it as an experiment. How was he born, right? What happens next? Then what happens next? And then what happens next? So those first 3 poems that we get to the streets are lit with brutal imagination were written in a couple of hours, right? And that kind of established the tone of the voice of that speaker for me, and it was established pretty quickly. But I started thinking about how do you fill him in. I was trying to fill him in. Just what does he know? What doesn't he know? How is he operating? Where is his angers? Where is his frustration? Where is his where is his humor? Right? Because he's also being very ironic at a lot of points in the story. That basically hopefully in the poems reflecting his position and his point of view, right? I've seen this before. I've seen this forever, right? Let me tell you something. I know this inside and out. Let me tell you about what this is like, right? So a lot of those poems have that little off to the side, sort of position, because he's trying to simply tell us, how old I am, how old this runs in this, just what she's tapping into. She doesn't know what she's tapping into, right? Right. So those first 3 or 4 poems were simply setting it up, and then, I had the idea of thinking about it. It was sort of like, it's kind of like, it's kind of like birth, because it's 9 months. It took 9 days. It's 9 months, right? With a birthing at the end of it, right? So that was going to be that was the general structure that I was hanging the poems on. And for me, it'd be a matter of saying, well, what day are we on? Yeah, what day are we in? Right? When this is happening, what day is where is he now? He's in the car, he's driving around. Which day is he reporting from? So I would start thinking from that, from that perspective. Where is he? Where are we in the drive? Right. Yeah.
In the 9 days between.
He talks about.
The 9 days from.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's just
I
interesting.
was just clarifying from the 9 days from when she invents him through Susan confessing, just like
Right.
what those 9
So
days.
it's 9 days.
Right,
Sorry,
9
go
days.
ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
But Cornelius talks about his birthing, and in fact, when those 3 poems happen at the beginning of the play, he's born at the moment that the two of them scream.
Right.
That's when he's actually fully formed, because he says, "When called, I come," and that's the moment she calls him.
Right.
You've lived with his.
Oh. Too, that like in the sort of lineage of, you know, the black man in the white imagination who exists without wit or humor, that he's just sort of like muscle and body and sinew,
Yes.
and you give him this like beautiful brain, and it's such a great gift.
Well, humor has been one of our defense weapons, right? Self-defense weapons for forever, right? It's been humor, right? Whether you think about it as Step and Fetch It, or Story Step It is, or you think of it as all these other characters in it, or you think of it like Eddie Murphy, right? right. It's this, you're not going to get me. You're not going to. I'm on top of this. You're not going to get me, right? I'm smarter. I'm smarter than this, right? And it's like that, and that's why I'm kind of infusing. I'm trying to tap into this idea of black humor, So if in a way the solo part where he's actually going through the different characters is almost like in my mind the characters when I was writing the book. Really, I'm not really a very spiritual person, but I really had a moment when basically I felt like a visitation from Uncle Tom. Just was pushing in and said, I need to say this. Right, I need to say this. I need to mention what's going on here. Right. So this is all back, and that starts the little cycle of the other fictional characters having their say. They're him, but they're also having their say about again how old it's been. In some way they're talking as if they were talking in the barbershop, so to speak. Right. Stag Lee comes in, man. You see this guy, Stag. What do you think? Oh man, it's like she thinks. It's that kind of stance that I'm going for. So using black humor as a weapon, right? As a self-defense weapon, is also part of the fabric of Mr. Zero.
There's a question coming in from David, and I think let's read this. You mentioned Amy Cooper. Do you think she created a Mr. Zero onto Christian Cooper that day in Central Park? Did she project a Mr. Zero? Did she invent a Mr. Zero that day in Central Park?
Well, she tried.
Yeah, I don't think she invented a Mr. Zero. I think she saw the noose.
Right.
I think she saw the noose. She thought, this is my way out, is the noose. I'll just call the cops. And I think her expectation was, as soon as she said, I'm going to call the police and say what I'm going to say, that he was going to run. Right. I think that was the expectation.
That's right. You will clear out because, man, you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen.
You're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. You know what the cops are going to do. I'm a white woman. Hey, you're a black guy. Hey, we're in the park. Hey, that was basically that was a calculation, right? And the thing that saved him was the camera. This is like we've been talking about. It's this idea how cameras have now been becoming more and more of the equipment these days that are stopping us. Even if sometimes the camera doesn't give us the effect we want. The cop gets acquitted or whatever. At least you get to see it, right? And Amy, and Chris basically just stood his ground and held his camera, right? But as Joe was saying, it's the noose, right? The police are my weapon.
The what?
The police are my weapon, and they're going to take. I'm calling them down upon you, and they're going to take care of you if you don't, step off.
So do you think that she really thought he was going to hurt her, or do you think she did it with a power move?
No, it was a total
power move.
Yeah, total power move. Absolutely, pure power move. She knew exactly what she was calling down, right?
Yeah.
But that reflex is the same reflex, right? Right. I mean, what she was saying after all this blew up was that I'm not a racist. I don't think like this. I'm not like that. I don't do this. And yet, when the moment came, there it was, right? right? You know, the black man's here. He's attacking me. I'm in the park. I'm a white woman. He's attacking me, right?
Well, also she was like approaching him in the video, like he was standing where he was, and she was coming to him.
Yeah, I know, because she was so enraged. Right? I mean, what was she enraged about? That he was talking back to her, right? That he was correcting her, right?
And that he wouldn't stop creating the evidence, saying you're wrong and here it is. Because when she said, "I'm going to call the cops," he said, "Please do."
Yeah, yeah, I guess, you know, right?
Yeah,
and that's the difference. But again, on the same day, George Floyd, right? Same day, the cops in that case, you know.
And the interesting thing about George Floyd is when they pull him out of the car, one of the first things he says is, "Don't kill me.
Don't kill me.
Are you going to kill me? Don't kill me." Those are the first words he speaks as he's being pulled out of his car.
Yeah.
And of course, in the case of Susan Smith, in inventing this man and giving a police sketch and having police and the FBI search for this imaginary man for 9 days, real people came into grave danger, right? The police arrested somebody, right? An innocent man who could have taken the fall and been mistaken for this man who did not even exist.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know that they arrested him, but he certainly became a person of interest.
Right. He was interrogated.
Yes.
He was interrogated. I think we have the police sketch. Clarissa, do we have that to bring up? We may not. I might not have queued that up, but.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, there it is. Real life Susan and real life Mr. Zero out of her imagination.
Mm.
Yeah. I think you've all spoken to this in a number of ways today, but I'm curious if there's kind of one thing that's living in your mind that you discovered in this iteration of working on the play 20 years later, that felt like a new idea or a new thought for you in approaching it.
Well, I mean, I think for me, I've already said it, which is that Zero is not outside of her, but inside of her. That he is her conscience, and her conscience is all of the things that move her, that force her to the truth. It is the most human instinct. You have to deal with what you think you've done one way or the other, and in this case, he forces her to ultimately what is the truth.
Yes, I agree. Everything Joe is saying, I think that's what it comes down to. I guess that's why I think it fits now, because again, I was saying earlier, we have to imagine that that new future. And part of that imagining the new future is admitting what you've done, right? And admitting your part in it. And so for me, I think that's also, I think to me, why it's useful to have it come back to right now, right? Also, though it's not about the change in the play, the change in the audience, but it was also a real unexpected joy and pleasure to see Joy and Sally back in those roles. You know, and you know, that was something I never expected to see again, right? So it was a real delight, just to have to sit there and be witnessing to all of this, and Jarrett's basically just trying to do this puzzle, right? This incredible puzzle, right? That was actually coming from Joe's head. right. And, you know, I remember hearing stories about the Beatles where John Lennon said, "I want a sound that sounds like monks on a hill, chanting, all together." And poor George Martin's got to figure out how to make that happen, right? It wasn't that extreme, but it was kind of like this. This is what I want you to do with this look, and then Jarrett figures out how to actually make that come to fruition. It was wonderful to watch.
I have to say, 20 years ago, this was one of the most extraordinary plays I had ever seen, and it was something we were so enormously proud to produce at the Vineyard. And I agree with you 100%, Cornelius. It is so rare that you get to revisit a play 20 years later with the same cast,
yes.
and in a moment where it speaks so profoundly to the current moment and feels so urgent and so necessary. And so it is a great, great gift to get to be here with all of you and to have been able to make this with all of you and be able to share it with people now. Again, Sally. Go ahead.
I was going to say 20 years versus now, and with the different ways of doing the piece, I think it's a testament to how solid this piece is, Cornelius's writing, because we did it in two different ways, but really the heart and the spirit of it were identical.
Mm-hmm.
It completely held, and I'm sure we could find a third way to do it and find, but the heart of it is the architecture of what Cornelius wrote, which is extraordinary.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah.
It really is. And again, just so grateful that new audiences and old audiences are going to have a chance to see this in this moment when it feels so incredibly important. So thank you all so much. Oh, yeah.
Can I just add one other thing too? Because to add to what everyone's saying, which I agree with wholeheartedly, I also think it's really important to be telling these types of stories through this like social media lens actually right now, because as we pivot to Amy Cooper newscasts on our phones, it's nice to have a similar piece of ingredients that's arguing against that in the same form. Yeah. And I just think that it's a really important thing to put this out into the digital zeitgeist as well as we're also consuming digital news of the same content. So to speak to form a little bit here, I think that's been really exciting.
And I think those will be really interesting questions to keep talking about, even as we're all live back in a theater again, hopefully before too long.
Very soon.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it was beginning to change before COVID, right? I mean, the production of Network that was done, the production of West Side Story that was done by the same director, but the idea of bringing cameras onto the stage, making it part of, I know lots of people objected, like, so wait, that's theater, but still, cameras have become a part of our lives.
Yeah.
A necessary part. I can't believe it's 7 o'clock. Where did it go?
We knew we had more to talk about than we would get through in an hour. We knew that.
Thank you, Joe, Cornelius, Sally, Jared, Sarah, Clarissa, all of you watching. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a reminder that Brutal Imagination by Cornelius Eady, directed by Joe Morton, streams this Thursday, May 20th until Thursday, June 3rd. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to The VT Show. If you would like to view previous episodes, you can find them on Facebook and YouTube.